About to attempt to faint the goat. Sorry.
You made him get the car. Uh-oh. Uh-oh. This is coming down. Oh.
Because when you're teaching economics, it's all about the goat.
Come on, laddie. Are you being nice to the goat? Come on. Come on, laddie.
Is that your good gum?
Take a video.
Yeah. Oh, that's a good. Oh, I got a good spot.
You might be. All right. We'll give you a little bit of milk, Uncle Milty, and then we'll go. If any of you guys watched Milton Friedman before, perhaps one of the finest economists ever. I'll warn you that Milton Friedman is full of trigger warnings and all those other things. So just because he torques people off because he says things.
When you see around the globe the maldistribution of wealth, the desperate plight of millions of people in underdeveloped countries, when you see so few haves and so many have-nots, when you see the greed and the concentration of power with it, did you ever have a moment of doubt about capitalism and whether greed's a good idea to run on?
Well, first of all, tell me, is there some society you know that doesn't run on greed? You think Russia doesn't run on greed? You think China doesn't run on greed? What is greed? Well, first of all, the world runs on individuals pursuing their separate interests. The great achievements of civilization have not come from government bureaus. Einstein didn't construct his theory under order from a bureaucrat. Henry Ford didn't revolutionize the automobile industry that way. In the only cases in which the masses have escaped from the kind of grinding poverty you're talking about, the only cases in recorded history are where they have had capitalism and largely free trade. If you want to know where the masses are worse off, it's exactly in the kinds of societies that depart from that. So that the record of history is absolutely crystal clear that there is no alternative way so far discovered of improving the lot of the ordinary people that can hold a candle to the productive activities that are unleashed by a free enterprise.
So it seems to reward not virtue as much as ability to manipulate the system.
And what does reward virtue? You think the communist commissar rewards virtue? You think a Hitler rewards virtue? You think, excuse me, if you'll pardon me, do you think American presidents reward virtue? Do they choose their appointees on the basis of the virtue of the people appointed or on the basis of their political clout? Is it really true that political self-interest is nobler somehow than economic self-interest? You know, I think you're taking a lot of things for granted. Just tell me where in the world you find these angels who are going to organize society for us. Well, I don't even trust you to do that.
Love me my Milton Friedman. Say again? Yes. Yes, but not for CAPM, so it wasn't quite as valuable as some of the other Nobel Prize winning things that we study in this class. They got a second tier Nobel Prize in economics. So as I was telling Dylan, as it was just he and I sitting here this evening, I said I got a number of I'm not feeling well emails today. And I need to work late emails and other things. So I'm not sure what we're going to have for attendance, but I'm going to get started because we got a lot to cover. And you don't, I mean, I know I discussed it with Keith with Milton Friedman. He just couldn't stand to be in the room when Milton was playing. That's okay. We'll get him, we'll convert Keith into a Milton Friedman disciple before the class is over. All right, so tonight we're going to talk about, so I've redone the syllabus. Well, let me kind of take a step back. I've redone the syllabus and adjusted as to what we're going to be, see, I'm so dorky. I read international economic law for fun.
Before you get too far started,
Yeah.
I got a question.
Sure.
I've ran into this a few times in research and papers, and I don't know too much about it, but I don't really like it. What is your thought on the Cato Institute?
What's my thought on the Cato Institute? Like specifically or generally?
It seems like a little extreme to me. Like most of the stuff that I read about them, it's a little sensible enough, but it's just kind of out there.
What do I feel about the Cato Institute? Okay, let me actually find the right one of these and then I'll answer your question on Cato. All right, so Cato Institute, I'll give you the teacher's answer and then I'll give you my answer. So the teacher's answer is anytime you go look at an organization, whether it's the Cato Institute, whether it's the Heritage Foundation, whether it's America for Progress, whether it's any one of these, they'll label themselves as a nonpartisan think tank. They're partisan and they don't necessarily think, they tank. And so you generally have folks who are behind this nonpartisan 501c3 have an agenda. and that agenda may be a progressive agenda, that agenda may be a conservative agenda, that agenda may be a libertarian agenda, which is what the three I just mentioned had. But they'll put out research that will tend to support only their particular point of view. They won't tend to put out research that counters what their stated mission, goal, or objectives are. And sometimes you can't find those stated missions, goals, and objectives. But if you take a look at really what they're researching, how they're presenting it, you should be able to get a pretty good sense for whether they lean right or lean left, or whether they lean center. And there's folks who do that too. You're going to run into the same thing with scholarly journals. You're going to run into the same thing with departments and universities because they tend to perpetuate their own. And so you've got a situation where any area that you look at for research, whether you're researching for papers or for your own personal interest, you're going to find a bias. And part of your goal, part of your objective is to try and understand what that bias might be. And then what academics do is try and debunk those biases. So they try and identify the biases and find counter arguments and those kind of things, tear the information apart. So Cato tends to be a libertarian oriented think tank, and most of what you're going to get out of them is libertarian thinking. Now, having said that, I've been a member of the Cato Institute for many years, so that tends to be closer to my political stream, is more libertarian than conservative, more libertarian than progressive. Although, if you're libertarian, you tend to fall on both sides, because you tend to be pretty progressive on personal stuff, and you tend to be pretty conservative on government stuff. But there's no room for us in any political party, so that's where Cato tends to fall. From a research perspective, what you're going to find from Cato is going to be generally things that say small government good, big government bad, government intervention bad, free markets good, and they're not going to publish research papers or studies that would go against any of those things, even if the data was available. So I happen to believe generally that Cato is more right than wrong, but I also recognize that everything they're putting out has a bias to support a libertarian agenda, and that they're not going to publish things that are counter to that. In order to get a good picture of any given issue, you really should be looking at that issue through the lens of Cato, Heritage Foundation, Americans for Progress, and several of the other think tanks that are out there, Pew Research, to be able to try and find a kind of a holistic view of any given issue. Does that answer the question? So you two missed the goats.
The what?
You missed the goats, and you missed Milton Friedman. But you didn't miss. And missing Milton Friedman, by the way, is kind of tragic. Although if you YouTube Milton Friedman, he's a Nobel Prize-winning economist. Because he didn't invent CAPM, but and I thank you for CAPM.
Who did that? Oh, that's why you guys are talking. Where's the M? The other side.
What about I heart CAPM? Like
I don't know. Okay, so I made a couple revisions as promised to the syllabus. So let's talk through those revisions quickly before I dive into today. Now the syllabus is up.
Wednesday we're getting our final, right?
No. You will be getting, no, slow down. I haven't gotten there yet. So here's what's changed. So based upon the feedback I got from you guys last class and what was left to instruct and what was left in the book and kind of where we wanted to go and what we'd already covered, I spun it toward less big picture or less kind of fancy esoteric stuff and more big picture stuff. More where banking sector intersects the economy and less kind of at different economic points. So where we're gonna look is chapter 15, which is understand methods for improving economic stability and the banking system's role in it. Chapter 16, which is understand impacts of inflation and deflation on the economy and management decisions. So kind of pulling it down to the firm again and looking at how do these things impact businesses. The final exam is going to be released Thursday. So I'll release it like I did last time through Moodle, kind of both. I'll post it up in Moodle. I'll post it as a page in Moodle. I'll send it as a announcement in Moodle. So you should be able to find it. As long as you get your email, you get, you know, it'll look like the last one. You'll get it multimodal this Thursday, 5/11.
Is Thursday 5/11?
Yes.
Oh,
Yeah.
We're almost done.
no, I hate this paper. It has to be 5 or 10 pages.
5 to 10 pages.
I haven't started. I have 2 papers I'm working on from that.
I can't get past page 2. I don't like know.
It's okay, I'll get it done.
Oh, I'm sure you will.
I'll do it on time.
So final exam will be released via Moodle on Thursday night.
Does it, like, is that gonna affect their grade if it's 5 or 10?
No, it's, as a matter of fact, the 5-page paper could get a better grade than a 10-page paper, maybe even significantly better than a 22-page paper, because I'm looking for concise answers, right in a business style. I want concise answers. I want it to be, here's the thesis, here's the research, here's the result, as opposed to like a rambling. It's.
You'd rather just get to the point than fluff it.
Oh yeah, I don't want fluff, and no one will. As soon as you graduate from here, if you write a fluffy paper, you're going to get fired, and people will throw you out of their office. They want short. They want straightforward. They want it supported with facts. They want your opinion. And they want you done. Most executives don't have time to read stinking term papers. They got time to read, you know, if it's 5 pages, you're running long. So this, for the folks down on Lacey, was 10 to 20 pages. Here it's 5 to 10, and I thought that was long. 5 pages is fine as long as you're covering the material. You go over 10 and you might get to the I'll stop grading at the 10th page and I hope you've got it done type of thing, because when you leave here, no one wants to read frickin' books. If they do, they'll go buy one at Barnes & Noble or on Amazon. So on class 14, which is going to be next Monday, a week from today, we're going to talk about chapter 18, which is we're going to talk about financial crisis. And kind of what people did during the financial crisis, what causes them, how the government kind of pulls you out of them, what the leading indicators are. So that way, when the next financial crisis comes, and it will come in your lifetime, you'll see, oh, your lifetime in particular, you're a lot younger than I am. But I've seen a couple of them already. Minor ones, major ones. You'll be kind of prepared. You'll understand what some of the leading indicators are. You should be able to go, okay, what do businesses do to protect themselves from downturns in the economy? What is the government going to do? And why you don't need to panic. And then the last class 15, is the final exam is going to be due and the paper is going to be due. And they're going to be due that night. So normally I've given you a couple days afterwards or a day or so afterwards to get it in. The problem is I got to get grades in by Friday because we have graduation on Saturday. And so I don't have any time to kind of delay the grading through the weekend. So and I've got board meetings that week as well. So while I normally would try and give you an extra couple days just in case, I can't. So I need them in, which is originally why I had the paper due earlier, so I can get those graded faster and get them back to you in time for the final. I wanted to give you the extra time, but that means that basically when we're walking out of class on Wednesday next week, everything's in. So get your questions into me early in that class and have your stuff kind of punch listed and ready to go if you need to get it done. Because when I walk out, basically once I hit the house, it's going to be grading for me from then until like 6 the next morning. Then I go into board meetings. Then I come out of the board meetings and I will finish grading, and I've got to have grades in by 5 o'clock by 1700 on Friday.
How long are the graduation ceremonies?
Say again?
How long are the graduation ceremonies?
So down below, which is the only frame of reference I have because it's the only I went last year. It was a couple hours. They moved it earlier in the day, so that it used to be in the afternoon, which was hotter than Hades in the gym down there. They moved it to the morning so that we get done before noon. It'll start at, I think, 9, and should be over by 11:30. The day before, there's a baccalaureate mass, and so that's where you get your happy hoods and all that good stuff to be able to go into. Oh yeah, the abbot does the mass. He's a pretty potent dude. He's got a stick that he beats you with. You're out of line. He's got a crozier. So if you guys have done, so I'll just make the pitch. When it comes time for you all to graduate, and I know you're all getting close, take the opportunity to walk.
That's hilarious. I was just talking to my mom about that.
Take the opportunity, because it only happens once.
I know.
So just do
I
it.
feel like-
Just gut it out. I mean, you're gonna go, screw it. And for my master's, I basically said, mail me my diploma. But in hindsight, I'm like, I probably should have just put on my fancy stuff and walked. So no, it's not. It's and your kids.
I don't like going to the stage.
Last year we had a single mom took her kid up with her, and it was awesome. So I mean, don't.
I can bring my kids.
Actually, I can't
Yeah,
even
do
tell
it.
you because I'll
Really?
start crying. I saw this commercial for, I think it was like maybe life insurance, and it shows this young couple, and you can tell like they had just got out of high school and they get pregnant. You see like their struggles and like, like they're paying bills and they have this kid and like young, and you see all like the stressors and stuff. And then it flashes forward, the mom's like 20 years older, and she's standing in the audience at a graduation ceremony for college, and they're like, Ed Barton, and then she stands up and starts clapping, and you see her little son, like 20-something, walk across the stage, yay. And then after he goes, they say, Ed Barton, like a second time, and then her husband walks across the stage, and she's like crying, and says, life doesn't always go as planned. It was like, this is so cute. Isn't that like the sweetest commercial?
It is.
Since like 20 nieces are going, they're walking.
Oh.
Are they little?
I didn't know that you can do that, but I'm
If they're little, no one's gonna turn you away. It's your stinking day.
I already.
The only reason I'm doing this is the family anyway.
Yeah.
Amazing.
I would love to bring my kids, and I will also phone for them.
You should.
Yeah, I will.
And if they give you a hard time, I'll go yell at somebody.
See, and then they'll be like, they'll remember when they walked across.
Yeah, with mom, and then they're gonna want to go to college and use all your. So that's what we're gonna cover on next Monday. Next Wednesday, class, everything in. What I'm gonna do at that point is I'm gonna take the time to sit down with any of you who want to sit down. We'll do like we did the one day that everybody kind of disappeared except for half the class. I guess a third of the class was left here. Then we'll talk practical stuff. What are you looking at doing afterwards? What are you talking about from a career perspective, education perspective? I'll give you some insights as to my own experience, my experience as a hiring manager. I've got a couple resumes which you guys have given me. I didn't have a chance to review them this last weekend. I did get a couple of the questions that I had already answered, so I'll get those turned back to you guys in time for that class. If any of you guys want to bring in resumes, I'm happy to go through them at that class one-on-one, or if you want to flash them up here and you want me to walk through and tell you what I'd say and what I wouldn't say in front of everyone, I can do that too. The keys that I want to try and cover for you guys is you're going to have spent, a significant amount of time, money, energy, and effort getting your business degree from St. Martin's University, and that's going to get you somewhere. But there's also all the stuff that's going to get you somewhere that's driven by the fact that you all have had lives outside of St. Martin's University, and that's extremely valuable, and you've been successful in those lives, and that's what's gotten you to this point. And you've got to be able to capitalize on that, whether that's in a job interview, whether that's on your resume, and whether that's in your jobs themselves. And then secondarily, we've got to take a look at how do you best promote yourself, and really how do you put yourself in best position to be successful. So tips like, for instance, if you go to a job and someone asks you to do research on something and you present them with a 21-page paper full of fluff, they're going to fire you, is an important piece of knowledge, because professors don't operate that way. For professors, it's okay, the more you write, the better, and the more you can cite, the better, and the more you can barf all over the page and make it look like you put in a ton of time, the better. That's not how the real world works. And so we need to make sure that you understand that success in the academy and success in the real world are sometimes two very different things. And I want to try and give you the last class since the funnel to take home. You know, and I'm going to have class tonight to walk through those questions, concerns, walk through resumes, walk through, you know, ideas of what you guys want to look at, and we'll call it complete when you guys, when that piece is done. And if you want me to stay late, I'll stay late and I'll go out there and I'll go through resumes and stuff like that. But you guys have been a fantastic class and fantastic to work with, and so I want to make sure you get something of value outside of a piece of paper coming out of St. Martin's University. So that's going to be the last class. So I took a couple chapters off the menu and spun 15, 16, and 18 into it. The research paper, like I said, I'm looking for 5 to 10, and length it's not as much a factor as quality. If you are 4.5 but you've got a great paper, you're going to get an A on the paper. If you've got 15 pages and it's garbage, it's going to get a C on the paper. So keep it concise, keep it well researched, use basic business English, not flowery English paper English, and you're gonna do fine. But I want to see that you actually did the work. You struggled with, and we kind of talked about this last class, you struggled with the issue. You tried to bring the issue forward. You struggled with it because none of the things that you guys are talking about are easy. And a few of you, when you said, well, I want to research, I use this example, the Great Depression. Okay, well, there's been libraries written on the Great Depression. And so, you know, you're going to find it difficult to get to 5 pages and make it be concise. And so, again, you're going to find elements of that to pick out and pull apart. A couple of you have switched topics already. I've had, I think, 3 of you switch topics already on a paper from what you initially started because you got into it. You're kind of running out of time now to do that again. But just kind of gut through and finish it out. You can get, I mean, again, on the other side, I can tell you that you can, if at this point in your career, since you're in 300 level business courses, you can't fake your way through 5 pages of something that looks like a research paper with some references attached that actually will hold up to scrutiny. You probably need to go back to the 100 level English courses and the 100 level social sciences courses to learn how to BS your way through a paper. So no matter how bad it is, get it in and get it done. So that's that at the end of the day, that's my guidance on the changes to the syllabus. Any questions before I dive into tonight?
I just want to say, thanks for doing that on that class. I would be first that really good.
No worries.
Very helpful.
No worries. Okay. What we're going to talk about tonight is economic stabilization. Basically, what happens when the economy starts to teeter, and what levers does the government have to stabilize the economy, and what roles do banks and the banking sector play in ensuring that the economy doesn't go completely upside down? Most of us, all of us, lived through the 2008 financial crisis. So we may, and it's pushing 10 years ago now, which means some of you might have been quite young and not have remembered much of it. But for those of you that were old enough to remember, it was a bit of a scary time if you didn't understand the principles of macroeconomics and understand what levers the government could pull and that they were likely to do so. One of the challenges that we run into is inflation. So inflation tends to be a leading indicator that something's changing dramatically in the economy. So inflation is nothing more than an increase in price and a decrease in the real value of static savings. So when I talk about static savings, what's that? Savings accounts at a bank would be a good example. Reserve notes, currency. Anything else you can think of?
Like
CDs, bonds. So what happens is, as inflation rises, the value of assets
the real value of assets, and I think this is something to keep in mind as you kind of move through your life. Because it's like an economics life lesson. The house that you bought for $150,000 last year is now worth $250,000 because the Tacoma market is heated up. Is the same house you paid $150,000 for last year. What's happened is you've seen inflation. The intrinsic value of that home hasn't changed. It's still a 3-bedroom, 1,100 square foot bungalow sitting on the hill in Tacoma. But what someone's willing to pay for has changed because there's been inflation in property values. However, you can go, hey, I can sell this house. I'm going to make $250,000, or I'm going to make $100,000 because I paid $150,000. I can get $250,000. If you still intend to live in that neighborhood, all of the other comparable homes have also likely raised in value by the same amount. And so your real wealth hasn't increased at all. The intrinsic value of that real estate hasn't changed. Real wealth is what occurs when your standard of living increases. So if you think about it, inflation, you could go, oh, I bought this house and it's now worth, I bought it for my grandparents. I bought it for $50,000 and now it's worth, $500,000. Look at all the money they made. But if your grandparents were to sell that house, they're going to have trouble finding another house comparable for the same price. They didn't really get wealth at all. That's just inflation. When they bought that house for $50,000, a new Oldsmobile would cost them $3,000. If they want to go out now and buy a new Chevy because Oldsmobile's dead, they want to go buy a new Chevy, it's going to be $30,000. It went out by 10 times too.
Everything went up.
They did not get it.
I have a question. What if it's like a second house? Then you make money, let's say you own a house, you buy a second house, then you rent it out, it's $200, you pay it off, now it's worth $450, but it's just a second house you're renting out. Do you really make money then? You want to sell it, even though you still have your own house?
So that's a good question. In theory, if that house went up in value at the same rate as everything else that went up in value, you didn't make anything. Because that same money you invested in that house, you could have invested in stocks, you could have invested in gold, you could have invested in a bunch of other things, and it would have gone up by the same amount. You sell that house, and you go, okay, I can go buy the things that instead of buying a new Oldsmobile, I bought the house. Now I sell the house, I'm going to go buy the new Oldsmobile, or I'm going to go buy the new Chevy. The value hasn't changed. Each one went up by 10 times. What happened during that period of time, though, is that house was a money-making asset. So the intrinsic value of the house didn't change. But what did change was the fact that during that period of time, you rented that house out. That was your hypothesis. You said, okay, I'm going to rent the house. You took income, so you generated income off that house. That paid down the loan. So you actually had an income-generating asset. But it's not a house you lived in. It's because it was an income-generating asset. If it was a vacation home and you were sending a check every month off to the bank to pay the mortgage off, and then you get to the end, if you had taken that same check and put it in the stock market, and if you had taken that same check at the beginning and put it in the stock market and everything went up by equivalent amount, you would have no more money than you have today. It's really looking at what's the intrinsic value. And did it truly change? Now, when you see real estate, which is often a way that people capture and try and build wealth, and it's an effective way to do it, where you've got a couple ways to be able to build that wealth is one, you buy property for investment. So it's not, okay, I'm buying it and I'm going to sit on a vacant piece of land because you've got property taxes, you got mortgage interest, you got those kind of things. Vacant land, unless you buy it in a spot where the intrinsic value is increasing because of development, tends not to create a heck of a lot of value. If people don't believe that, go buy 25 acres outside Yakima and hold it for the next 20 years and tell me how much money you've really made on that land. You go buy 20 acres in the middle of downtown Seattle, that's going to create, because you have development, the intrinsic value there is rising due to supply and demand. And so again, it all comes back to economics, and economics all comes back to CAPM. So but if you look at real estate, your first way that you can make real money in real estate is you buy smart real estate, you rent it to businesses or individuals. They largely cover your carry. The value increases, you've locked the purchase price, the rent increases, you're able to pay it off with other people's money. And so your initial investment of $40,000 becomes $400,000. You never put more than $40,000 into the property. because it went up over time, and it was paid for, the mortgage, the property taxes, all those things were paid for by somebody else. They used it as an investment property. Holding it as recreational property, unless you get a supply and demand shift, okay, well, San Juans are trendy and cool, and so the property values have gone up quite a bit as you get people from Hollywood buying in San Juans. That changed your supply and demand. The demand went up, so prices go up, intrinsic values rise. But unless you see a change in supply and demand, all inflation does is push prices up without any change in intrinsic value. And so think about inflation. If you've got hard assets, inflation will cause the value of those hard assets to rise. It's a way to protect against inflation, the whole inflationary assets. But static savings, like currency, savings accounts, CDs, where you lock them in at a lower rate than the inflation rate, you're actually going to lose money. The real interest rate is going to be negative, potentially. Because if you have 20% inflation and you're locked into a 5-year CD at 3%, you've got a problem. If you've got currency in the mattress and you're seeing inflation, you've got a problem. You're losing purchasing power every day. So think about that. If you start feeling like or seeing that inflation is rising, the strategy is to move into assets that tend to be inflationary assets. That's where people go, oh, as a hedge against inflation, I'm going to invest in gold. Because gold is a commodity and it tends to go up and down with inflation. It tends to be less supply and demand driven now that it's not used as much in manufacturing.
I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
With Sarah, what Sarah said, if it is your second home and you purchase it for 200,000, and then you waited until the market goes up, just like the inflation rate, and then later on you sold it for 350. So you're saying that 150, I mean, profit is not profit?
Well, it depends. What are you going to do with the 350?
I mean, you just sold it because it's time to sell.
It's time to sell. So
Seller's market.
So what you may have experienced is inflation, but you invested those dollars in an inflationary asset. The issue is when you go to sell that house for 350, if you said, okay, I'm not going to go buy that house, or I'm not going to go buy another house, an equivalent asset, I'm going to buy an asset that's depreciated. So I'm going to go buy a computer, because a computer in 1980 was $4,000, now it's $400. A house was $40,000, now $400,000. I buy a lot more computers than I can houses, now the sale price. When you've got different types of assets, that doesn't hold. So to your point, if you're going, okay, look, if you're looking at like kind assets, and you go, I'm going stock to stock or house to house or car to car or something along those lines, inflation will tend to move the entire asset class with it. If you look at, okay, I'm going to invest in these houses because over the next 10 years, I expect the price of the houses to double. And I intend to then use those proceeds to buy technology because I expect the price of technology to fall, and therefore I'm going to be able to get a bigger spread. I could buy 1,000 computers instead of 10 computers. That's true. I don't know why you want 1,000 computers, but that's true. So if you're looking at disparate assets, you can arbitrage that. But the general rule is inflationary assets will tend to move up in lockstep based upon the rate of inflation. When you look at real estate has multiple, it may not be the best example, but it's an easy one because you have multiple challenges with real estate. You can't pick it up and move it.
Yeah.
So we talked earlier when we were talking about iPhones, it's kind of like the iPhone or the iPad index as opposed to the Big Mac index, and the challenges associated with that. Same thing applies here. If you can't pick up that house and move it. A house in Seattle is going to be driven by localized supply and demand factors, just like a house in Yakima or a house in Montana. And so, you may see a doubling or tripling in real estate prices in Seattle and a 5%, 10% increase in Yakima because the supply and demand is different. So you've got different inflationary pressure. So if your thought was, okay, well, I bought this house in University Place, and it's awesome sauce, and it's gone up in value by $200,000. Which, by the way, one of my guys, I'll tell the story. One of my guys who's an electrician down at the university, he's been working at the university for 10 years, retired from Boeing, went to work for the university. Retired, got laid off from Boeing, went to work for the university. He bought a house, he's had it for like 20 years down here in just outside Olympia. So he basically owes nothing left on a house. He's selling for $325,000. Nice house. I mean, it's a decent house. He's retiring from the university, He's really good with his money, saved his money. But he bought 5 acres and a 2-bedroom house outside Williamsport, Pennsylvania for just over $100,000. So he's like, look, I paid cash for the house. My real estate taxes are really low. I've managed to save a bunch of money. I get $200,000 I get to put in my pocket, which is the difference between the houses. The house I got out there is almost as nice as the house I got here, but it costs 1/3 the amount. So he's 60 years old, 61 years old. He goes, I'm retired, I'm done. He goes, I think the prices here aren't going to go up that much more, and that area is depressed. And so he basically said, I can't move the house, but I can move myself. So he sold here, bought there, and he's leaving the end of the month. And I'm kind of jealous because if I could do that,
You can do it.
I got kids. I can't leave my kids out here.
Well, yeah.
So I'll go to Monsanto. But the issue is very much the same, where you go, okay, if I sell my house in Bothell and I go buy a house in Monsanto, I can have $400,000 left over. Now, do you want to live in Monsanto, Washington? I don't know.
I don't know what it is.
It's all going to the beach.
Oh, really? Oh, I want to.
Yeah, it's on the way to the beach might be giving it a lot of credit.
Sure.
So those are situations where you can arbitrage that situation on real estate, but he's got to move 2,600 miles to do it. So for inflation, the central bank sets an inflation target. So the Fed or the European Central Bank looks at a myriad of factors, and we'll talk about some of them, and says, okay, we're going to set an inflation target, 2%, 2.5%. If inflation gets much higher than 2.5%, we're going to throttle it back with monetary policy. And if inflation falls much below 2.5%, we're going to actually cause inflation to occur.
And this seems to be united questions here. I was thinking about this last week. So the target rate for my Fed, is this basically them announcing it, trying just to get their word out there? I mean, because they end up setting a different rate, but they have their target rate. So is that just for positioning and trying to influence things getting to work in the general direction?
There's a part of it, Chuck, which is very much a look. We're attempting to influence. We're attempting to influence economic confidence and behavior in the market by saying we expect the inflation rate, or we're targeting the inflation rate of 2%. What that does is you go, okay, the Fed's going to try and keep the inflation rate at 2%. I have a reasonable level of confidence that they can do that. And so you then begin to act as if the inflation rate is going to be 2%. If you're a market-driven guy, if the market believes it's going to be 2%, the market forces it to be 2%. So essentially it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. So there's an element of it which is designed to take uncertainty out of the market and really drive things down to that band of plus minus 2 to 4% inflation rate. So yeah, there's definitely signaling, and the Fed, if you guys, because I know you all were, you left here last week and you were all fired up about the Fed, and then you saw that Janet Yellen it was Federal Open Market Committee week, and so every 6 weeks, kind of like some little beetle that comes up every 6 years. Every 6 weeks is Federal Open Market Committee week, and last week was it. And Janet Yellen said, "What? Anybody pay attention? Come on, please tell me you listen to Janet Yellen."
No, you
I'm getting it on, David. So no changes to the rates, but we're going to look again in June. So in 6 weeks, the end of June, we're going to take a look again. So there's a signal in the market. To your point, Chuck, they're signaling in the market that, hey, we're going to potentially look at raising rates in June. So the market responds to that. Interest rate futures adjust, stock market adjusts, risk-free rates adjust, and what they want to do is get that into the market so that people begin to kind of compensate for it, so that way if it happens, it has less of a surprise impact.
So that's kind of still factored in the next rate.
So the Fed has said, 2 to 4% is where our inflation target is for the macro economy. What's the right level of inflation? How do you think they come up with that?
History, years of
of monitoring the system. Because if it's more than 4%, it's like really bad, right, for the economy, because everything's moving too high.
Why is it bad? Why 4%? I mean, why not 6%? That's really not that much more than 4%.
It's not that much, but, you know.
Why not 0? Why is actually like getting more and more and more spending power?
Saving makes it, the money supply less liquid.
Oh, God bless it. So why else? Why not 8%? Go 5. By 5. Come on.
Is there? No, I didn't say, you said it.
The original
They're not
budget,
gonna be putting as much money in it because it doesn't cost them. So,
Foreign exchange too.
What about foreign exchange?
If it's 8%, right, we'll start speeding up our inflation will be faster than other countries. The pound will get stronger than the dollar, even worse. And it's stronger right now. It's just
So what's wrong with weak dollars, man? Didn't we talk about like weak dollars? Although the president doesn't like to be weak dollars provide exports. Isn't that cool? What's wrong with weak dollars?
We are like the center of the world. We don't have weak dollars if we own a central bank and everybody depends on us, right?
but you want other people to buy your stuff too in other countries. It's too strong, they can't afford to buy it, so you're only stuck with domestic sales or consumption.
Anything else? Oh no, it's actually you guys are on it. You're kind of beating generally around it as well. So the Fed also targets where the economists generally target a 2 to 4% real growth rate in the economy as generally sustainable, and a 2 to 4% population growth rate is reasonably sustainable. And so it's kind of this magic stability number where they expect the economy to grow by about 4%, productivity to grow by about 4%, inflation to rise by about 4%, population to rise by 2 to 3%. And so everything kind of gets targeted in this 2 to 4% range: inflation, growth, population growth, and productivity. You put all those things together and it creates a relatively stable groove for the economy to be able to grow without it overheating, causing labor shortage, and without it causing capital shortage. So that's kind of where your balance is labor capital shortage. So the approach that they use is they try to keep all those bands in line. If you see any of those bands go out of whack, so you all of a sudden start seeing productivity growth really high or really low, you start seeing population growth really high or really low, then the Fed's going to have to adjust monetary policy essentially to compensate for those things. And when you see massive productivity increases, you generally then start to see unemployment. Essentially, what happens is each person is more productive. If the economy isn't growing at the rate of productivity, then you start seeing unemployment kicking in because each person is being more productive. You don't need as many people, and so people start getting laid off. And so you've got to keep all those things kind of in sync. Any one of them gets too far out of whack, and your economy starts to have problems. And that's really where the Fed starts looking at these elements. And they use inflation really as a proxy because it's a price. So inflation measures the price of technology, the price of wages, the price of commodities. All that is factored into inflation. So that's why it's useful to be able to utilize as a key metric in the economy. So U.S. has traditionally targeted a 1 to 2% inflation rate to keep liquidity sufficient for economic growth. So Chuck had kind of hit on the liquidity element. You got to make sure that there's enough cash, enough growth in the money supply to be able to power the multiplier, to be able to power the need for capital. Once you have liquidity come out of the system, we kind of saw that 2 classes ago, you have liquidity come out of the system, everything starts to grind to a halt. and the economy can crash out pretty quickly.
Okay, so like 2 minutes ago, you said that the target rate was 2 to 4%. And then here the US traditionally targets, so who was the other person targeting? Who was targeting the 2 to 4?
2 to 4 would be the 1 to 2 is where the U.S. is targeting today.
And
2 to 4 has been, if you look at our inflation targets, yeah, we're going all the way back to the 30s. So right now, actually, I probably should use traditional estimates, but we're getting a 2 to 4% rate. We haven't tended to get to really adjust on inflation until it stretches much above 4%.
So the correct answer today would be 1 to 2%.
1 to 2%. Actually, the Fed is targeting, I think, about a 2% rate, and that's something we can look up. So we're going to break, we'll look it up and see what the current Fed inflation target is.
because population growth of 2015 was 0.8%, which of course affects a lot of growth in European countries because they have their growth rates are negative. They are negative. Less workers in the force, aging population.
Collapsing.
That's another class, right?
As I say, collapsing Ponzi scheme, pension plans.
So what is, Trump, like, how is he affecting the economy or whatever?
He hasn't done anything yet. He'll claim he has, but he's only been in office for 115 days. Normally, it takes, if you look historically, put the first 6 to 12 months of economic performance on the last administration under policies generally, to the extent that their
So what
policy
is
doesn't.
he like trying to change?
What's he trying to change?
He wants to rebuild the
In,
Obama.
like, regards to,
In regards to this, he doesn't have a part to play. Why?
I don't know.
Well, you should know. We covered it last class.
Oh, because it's part of, it's not, it's like the House of Representatives and the other people that are in charge.
Yeah, the Fed, the president doesn't, in theory, doesn't impact the Fed. He gets to make the Fed appointments, but once they're in there, he can't,
But
they can only be
can't
impeached. He can't
because
fire.
that Obama appointed them.
Obama appointed Yellen and most of the Fed governors.
I mean, so I know Trump is gonna appoint another one, right, after this one.
Well, yeah, he'll have the chance to do the next appointment. I think Yellen's term will be up during this administration. So what's the president trying to do, essentially? Well,
I want to know.
Yeah, I
yes,
don't know.
so do I.
You like it?
The challenge is you've got, and again, I'll take this as an opinion bias question.
Did that name on this?
The president comes out of an environment that's not governmental, right? He's a business guy. And I'm trying to make this as neutral as I can, even though it's got a bias to it. And so as a result, the way he approaches the economy, or the way he intended to approach the economy, was as a series of deals that string together and turn into kind of a macroeconomic policy. I think what he's finding, however, is that it doesn't really work that way. It's an extraordinarily complex, the economy is an extraordinarily complex ecosystem, and you can't just make it, let's go do a deal and have it work and really ripple through the economy the way he anticipated. So what's the president trying to do economically? The biggest things that I can kind of draw a broad brush on is reduce regulation, which will allow small and mid-sized businesses in particular, although pretty much everybody will be impacted, to be able to grow more rapidly. So for instance, one of the regulations that was promulgated by the Obama administration was to increase the minimum wage required to be considered an exempt employee from $24,000 to $48,000 a year. So regardless of your job duties, if you were not making at least $48,000 a year, you had to be paid overtime. And that was a regulation change. The Trump administration basically said, we're not going to enforce that regulation. It got overturned in the Fifth Circuit, and then they said, we're not going to defend it. We're going to try and come up with something else. So what he's doing is kind of rolling back pay regulations, rolling back working condition regulations, what you saw with the American the Affordable Health Care Act, or whatever it was that just passed, was reducing the regulation on healthcare so that it was going to be cheaper and easier for people to get healthcare, or cheaper and easier for insurance companies to offer healthcare or something. But that's his approach has generally been, on one hand, how do I drive regulation out of the economy? On the other hand, what he's tried to do with less success, although it remains to be seen how effective it is in the long haul, is I want your manufacturing to be done here. And if you're not going to do your manufacturing here, I'm going to put at risk your government contracts. So essentially, he's trying to provide a combination of tax incentives, which would be fiscal policy, which is where the president plays, and regulatory impacts. You go, hey, I want to keep manufacturing jobs here, and I don't want them offshore, but I want them outsourced. When it comes to currency, he had originally said, I'm going to declare China a currency manipulator, and I want a strong dollar. I think what he's realized is a strong dollar doesn't necessarily help your exports, and it tends to drive imports. And so now he's backed off this currency manipulator talk. He's backed off the strong dollar talk. He's backed off the I'm going to terminate NAFTA. He's backed off the. So I think what we're seeing is a president right now who is working diligently to try and understand macroeconomics, and might actually be starting to listen to some of his policy advisors around, you may not want to do this, you may want to do this. The folks who have been here for the last 25 years or 30 years since the Reagan administration, through the Clinton administration, the Bush administrations, and the Obama administration weren't all stupid. And the economic policies, which tended to look the same regardless of Republican or Democrat in office, was because they tended to be good economic policies that tended to grow the economy at a pretty reasonable rate since 1981. And we're going to continue those policies. So I think what you're seeing now is him recognizing that, oh, well, maybe they weren't as stupid as I thought they were on the campaign trail. And the policies that have been in place make sense because it's an extraordinarily complex ecosystem. I mean, we can sit here and talk about, well, the Fed does this, the Fed does that, but it ripples through the economy. There's always, as we talked about in other classes, anytime you have a government action, there tends to be unintended consequences. And I think the president's also recognizing that you can't turn the ship really quickly, and that the unintended consequences tend to occur faster than the intended consequences. And so as a result, I think he's learning on the job how to implement economic, fiscal, and legislative policy. So, I mean.
So you have Facebook?
Yeah.
Okay, what is all of those,
Brandon.
what is all those memes I always see that, see about, Trump and, a pre-existing condition?
Yeah, well, I'm not gonna go down the American Affordable Health Care Act or whatever it is.
Is that what it's about health
Yeah.
care? So he's changing that?
Well, yeah, kind of. I mean, it passed.
No,
It passed the House, hasn't passed the Senate. Well,
so it's not really that.
yeah, it won't pass the Senate in its current form. So essentially, the memes are misleading. Yeah.
But what is it talking about, I'm saying?
So basically, they passed a change. They repealed Obamacare, or they voted to repeal Obamacare. The Affordable Health Care Act, ACA. They put the ACHA in, which is the Republican version, and they said, okay, under the Affordable Care Act, regardless of when you got your insurance, if you had a pre-existing condition, you're covered. Under the new regulation, or under the proposed regulations, it would be as long as you don't have a lapse of health insurance of more than 62 days, your pre-existing condition is covered. If it goes over 62 days, then the insurance company has to cover you, but they could charge you a higher premium. And so essentially what it's designed to do is to make sure that folks maintain insurance coverage. And if you don't, then all of a sudden you go, oh, I found out I've been diagnosed with cancer, so now I'm going to go get insurance. You can't game the system that way. It depends on who you're talking to. Some folks would sit there and go, look, I haven't had insurance for 15 years as a self-employed, whatever. And the fact that I go in and go get insurance and it's a pre-existing condition shouldn't necessarily disqualify me from getting insurance. It shouldn't mean I have to pay $1,000 or $1,500 or $2,000 a month for the insurance. I should be able to get covered. On the other side, most most of your insurance companies, and candidly, when you dig into the thing, I bet you a majority of Americans, if they understood it, would go, well, yeah, that makes sense. You shouldn't be able to jump into insurance when you've got a problem. You should be able to you should have it all the time. I have a health problem, so now it's a pre-existing condition, I can jump in. The issue, the big question in my mind is 62 days a long enough period to go, okay, you can be without insurance for 2 months and 2 days. And if it's longer than 2 months or 2 days and you have a pre-existing condition, you now have to pay a differential premium. Is that long enough? Should it be 90 days? Should it be 120 days? Should it be 180 days if you're out of work? And you know, should it tie to unemployment benefits, for instance? Those are things that I'm like, you know, that's where the argument can be. The details may or may not. I mean, you can argue the details, but it's not, oh my God, they're not going to cover pre-existing conditions anymore. That's not what the new law says. On the other side, it's not the way it was, which was, look, if you have a pre-existing condition, you're guaranteed a premium. You're guaranteed healthcare at the same premium as everybody else in that pool was paying. We can't have a differential risk premium for women. We tend to cost more on insurance. We can't have a differential risk premium for folks who are, you know, if you're in this pool, you're in this pool. And so I can't go, well, women have to pay more because you kind of cost more for health insurance.
You think that's better than what Trump is trying to do?
What?
Like, is that what you're saying, that the Obamacare compared to what Trump is trying to do?
No, it's just different. It's just different. I don't know if one is, it depends on who you are. Because at the end of the day, there's no free lunch. If you learn nothing else in this class, it's in the economy, there's no free lunch, and every impact has an unintended consequence. So to go, okay, we'll cover everybody for everything. So Medicaid for everybody, Medicare for everybody. That's got a cost. And if you go, okay, it's health insurance for everybody, or the Obamacare, that's got a cost. If you go, well, I'm going to do this kind of hybrid thing that we're going to changing pre-existing conditions, some of the other rules and regulations, that may decrease the cost to the general populace, but increase the cost to those folks that are specifically impacted by that change to the regulation. And so it's really how much of that cost do you transfer from the individual to the collective?
Yeah.
And that's at the end of the day, and I will tell you again, my opinion is you either go one direction or the other. The hybrid stuff that we've done doesn't really work. So if you go, okay, look, we're going to go, everybody goes on TRICARE. The entire country goes on TRICARE because it exists. We've got it. The government runs it. It's great. It's wonderful. Okay, that's fine. If you go, we don't do health insurance anymore, and everybody has to pay out of pocket for everything. Okay, that's fine. We have free market health insurance. That's fine. But if we have this hybridized whatever the heck that we've got now, it's not allowing the free market to work. For those of us who have operated within the environment of economics, like all of you in this class, price floors, price ceilings create inefficiencies and dead weight loss in the market. When you have mandates, you create artificial shortages or excesses. And so when you go, okay, we're going to remove all those mandates, now you've got other issues at play. Is it fair? Is it not fair? What happens to the poor folks? Well, you know, should we have, if we say universal health coverage is another piece of, I hate to use the word right, because it's not. Rights are enumerated in the Constitution, healthcare isn't in there. But if you say, we believe as part of our fundamental values in the United States that every person should be covered by universal health care, and that no one should be without health insurance, then my question would be, if that's taken as a fact, is this the best and most economically efficient way to provide that health care? And I think if anyone told me that the ACA or Obamacare or the new Trump care is the economically most efficient way to provide universal health coverage to anybody, I'd tell them that they're nuts. Because you probably have to go to an extreme to be able to get economic efficiency. So I tend to be one where I'm like, well, we don't want to talk off the insurance companies, so we're not going to go to universal health care and get them all out of business. But we don't want to. We don't want to like go, okay, well, what happens if we privatize everything? So we're not going to put the VA out of business. So we're not going to put TRICARE out of business. We're not going to put Medicare out of business. And so we're going to try and put something in the middle and mandate this, enforce that, and create an inefficient economic market where you have dead weight loss and non-clearing prices. And we're gonna hope that it works, and it doesn't.
Since we're already down this rabbit hole, isn't it Sweden that's got free healthcare?
There's no such thing as free.
Well, not free,
No, I mean,
but
the socialized covered, like
So you-
Ireland.
is it Sweden?
Many of the Scandinavian countries, so Norway, Sweden, Finland, Denmark, Iceland.
Is Ireland the same?
Ireland, I don't know what Ireland's health looks like. Britain National Health Service and the US.
Those countries do that, they make, I just don't like, I know it's.
55% income tax.
Yeah, a combination of factors. So what I would tell you is for those folks that go and look at the Nordics, if you want to look at the Nordics, essentially Norway and Denmark are petrostates that pump oil out of the North Sea and around Greenland and other areas. And so they're fairly wealthy. Sweden's got iron ore deposits up in the north section of Sweden, and Sweden's got, all of them have very high income taxes for the people, low income taxes on their corporations. And they have relatively small and homogeneous populations. So what you're not finding is these countries going, give us your poor, you're hungry, you're huddled masses, you're free. Sweden's done some of that, but most of the other ones are small, homogeneous, relatively wealthy countries that are able to go, okay, that's our value system. When the larger you get, the harder it becomes to administer. The more diverse it is, the more diverse you are, the harder it becomes to administer, because you now have differentials between Maine and New Mexico that you have, different economy, different populations, different climatic issues, other things that you're like, okay, it's very difficult to be able to offer exactly the same solution in Hawaii as you offer in Alaska. And so those are some of the challenges. But the Nordics do it fairly well. Britain does it fairly well. But if you talk to the British folks, Canada has the universal healthcare system. But if you talk to folks that are living in it, it's got problems too.
I know that Ireland, I heard that the kids get allowance like weekly or monthly. Yeah, so the more kids you have, like each kid will have allowance, like.
Ireland got bailed out by the EU because their economy was so screwed up and their government couldn't afford it. So I wouldn't necessarily put Ireland at the top of my list.
I want to live there. Stop laughing. I want to move to Ireland.
So what happens when prices are too low?
She had classes with my sister before she got.
Oh, yeah.
She found out she's 30% Irish.
Oh, really?
I had no idea.
I'm 4% Neanderthal, so if you ever wonder, I got to put up.
What?
4% Neanderthal.
Neanderthal.
Where's that? Let me just take down the class and just try. What is it?
So what happens when when you have disinflation? When prices are too low, when inflation's too low, what happens?
So I look, he's laughing. I just nothing from laughing.
It's
I'm
early.
gonna put it
I
right
know
now.
everyone is, but
Burning the early species of man is Neanderthal.
right,
Yeah.
I know about the progression.
Yeah, my ancestors obviously would pretty much mate with anything. So
I'm gonna find a sperm donor.
What?
For what?
For what?
Oh,
I'm gonna have another baby.
what happens when rates are too low? Focus. What happens when rates are too low? What happens when we see disinflation? What's bad about that?
Where?
Line up.
Economic growth.
Lack of economic growth. Liquidity starts to freeze up. I know.
Smart baby.
Yeah, but you 4%
Crazy girl.
So you end up with disinflation. You end up with liquidity, a liquidity crunch. You end up with a non-progression of the economy. You end up with disinflation. It's a bad answer. What happens when inflation rates are too high? Yeah, we did. Come on! We've gone down ancestry, we've gone down healthcare. Let's go back to inflation. What happens when inflation rates are too high?
It kills the money back by it.
Does what?
The money back to multiply because people are taking loans, spending it, and all that stuff.
So they end up, it slows down the ability of people to borrow. The risk-free rate begins to rise. The hurdle rate for investment begins to rise.
Over what? Yeah, so, I mean, inflation causes more employment, right?
Not necessarily.
Because people spend more money. Right? Like,
Are they really spending more? They're spending more money, but are they really getting more value?
well, they think they have more money now, so they're spending more, which means companies are hiring more people, right?
That's liquidity. That's the money multiplier piece that Dylan's talking about. You've got liquidity. Liquidity drives the economic engine, and it multiplies as it flows through the economic engine. When you've got high inflation rates, what will end up happening is your interest rates begin to rise, your hurdle rates on projects begin to rise, the real value of savings begins to fall. You become less inclined to be a saver generally, although interest rates will rise on savings as well. You become less inclined to be a saver. It's more difficult to be an investor and things start to grind to a halt again. You also begin to lose confidence in the currency because we have a fiat currency system. So part of the way that you're able to actually go, okay, I've got confidence in the currency is that you've got stability. Once you see a significant rise in inflation, you don't have that stability anymore. And so you go, okay, you begin to lose confidence in the system itself. So the focus of central banks is to provide stability. That's really why the central bank's there, is for you to be confident enough for the central bank to be, or for the central bank to be there so that you're confident enough to transact in the market, so that you can make intelligent investment decisions, intelligent savings decisions, intelligent business decisions. So remember, going back to last quarter, risk is deviation from expectation, right? The standard deviation is risk. So you've got a mean or an average that is what you expect to have happen, and any deviation from that, plus or minus, is risk. And so what we want is stability. We want things to have as low a standard deviation as possible so we can predict what's going to happen. If we can predict what's going to happen, we make a lot better decisions. We feel a lot more comfortable. Everybody's happier, get high utility, we all hold hands and goodbye. And so the desire to keep inflation and output stable and minimize business cycle impacts is really the role of the central bank. That's the purpose, is to keep the economy, especially in a fiat currency environment, to keep the economy kind of on an even keel so people don't lose confidence. Because what happens if people lose confidence in the economy in a fiat currency environment?
Comes to a grinding halt.
Dogs and cats sleeping together. It's like Ghostbusters all over again. I mean, it's bad. So they came up with, and this happened after I graduated from college. So I actually got to do some studying on my own here for this class on the Taylor rule, because this didn't exist when I was taking this class back years ago. So the Taylor rule says central banks can generally apply opposite pressure and natural economic forces to moderate business cycle impacts. Great, that's what we've been talking about. When the economy gets too hot, the central bank tries to slow it down. When the economy gets too slow down, the central bank tries to speed it up. So it'll provide this moderating effect on the business cycle. The Taylor rule was developed by Dr. John Taylor at Stanford University. As far as I know, he's not yet won the Nobel Prize. So because he hasn't won the Nobel Prize, I don't have him in the same level as Sharp or as Traynor or as Milton Friedman. But Taylor said we can look at the neutral real interest rate. So the rate at which, the interest rate at which output equals potential output. So they look at the economy and they go, okay, how much should the economy be generating? What's the potential output? And then he goes, okay, what's it actually generating? Normally there's a difference. The economy's slow or the economy's overheated. He says, okay, we're going to figure out what the interest rate needs to be to make those two things equal. That's a neutral real interest rate. There's an output gap, which is the difference between the actual and potential economic output, and the difference between targeted inflation and actual inflation. And then they do a regression analysis to come up with coefficients to determine how a change in one variable impacts another. So here's what I'm trying to get to when it comes to the Taylor rule. We'll look at it graphically. All of this has been reduced to a math problem. We're not going to do the math. I'm not going to ask you to do the math on the final. And I wouldn't recommend using the Taylor rule as a key. But as computerization has become more and more common and prevalent, and the cost has come down, and our ability to look at massive amounts of data has increased, and you got into a big data world, we've been able to take most of these impacts of the economy and reduce them to math. And go, we can come up with equations to go, okay, if you increase interest rates by this much, and remember I said it's an extremely complex equal system. In general, they reduced it to math and said, okay, in order to keep things level, you need to do this, 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 and this, and that's the Taylor rule. There's a number of discussions around the Taylor rule because it might not work at extremes. And we're going to talk through a couple of the extremes and kind of go, look, if it was so easy that Federal Open Market Committee would just push a button and the computer would tell them, okay, set interest rates here, they walk out and go, well, okay, we're going to set interest rates here because the Taylor rule tells us to, because we did this big regression analysis, we did took all this economic data, and we looked at potential inputs, potential outputs, and other things, and we decided that we could come up with this answer. So before I dive into the next couple slides where we talk about criticism, I'm going to ask you all to put your most skeptical hat on and take a look at that absolutely lengthy, hard to understand definition in the third bullet, and point out to me, without knowing anything about what the math looks like, if I said, tell me why this might not work, point out to me 2 or 3 things in there that you would go, that could be a problem.
What I'm thinking is, can you get a real-time any of those facts to justify?
There's one.
Thank you, sir.
All the economic data we have is ex post, it's after the fact. You don't know what's happening now. You only know what happened yesterday and before. And in general, when you're talking about the entire economy, although the speed of information has increased significantly since 1993, when this was originally developed, our ability to be able to look at real-time economic data is limited. Production data is limited. We can get it 30, 60 days in advance when it gets reported out, but by that time, the economy's already moved. So that's one. 2 others.
How do you find potential output?
Yes! Potential! Who the hell defines potential?
That is my.
What's potential output? Who determines what potential output is? How do you measure that?
Yep.
So anytime you see the word potential, there's an opinion embedded in that potential. This isn't science. If someone work an extra 5 minutes, does that increase the potential? What happens if everybody works an extra 10 minutes? Does that include, a change to this regulation or that regulation or another Trump administration? Who knows what potential is? So that's perfect. So potential. The 2 biggest elements in here that cause problems are the lack of real-time data. So you're always using age data and the definition of potential output. What's the last one? And this is one, you guys are in quant methods. You guys doing statistics and quant methods after this? Is that a statistics course?
Sure.
Okay. So there's one other piece in there.
So we have gas.
Is it because there's, what it says, turn out a change of one variable impacts another? Is that because there's more variables to go in than just those?
Yes, you're onto it mathematically. I don't think you realize it, but you're onto it mathematically. So it's in that segment of the definition.
Can you see?
Oh yeah, I can see it. I can see it.
I don't want to.
Tear it apart. Come on. There's one more. Dylan's in the right segment. He's in the right little sub-phrase up there. When you're doing regression, so I'll give you the answer because it's a regression question. When you're doing regression, what you end up with is a line of best fit. You take all this amount of data and you plot it out, and a computer essentially, you get the line that gives you the least amount of sum of squared errors, right? SSE over SSE. Is that right?
I don't remember my business.
So statistics will always come back.
Then I'm not gonna remember.
So the line of best fit is a line that has the least sum of squared errors, least SSE, but that means that there's errors in there, right? I mean, that line is not without estimate. It's not without error. It's not without other variables. And what those squared errors are, some squared errors, because you want to reduce the negatives, make them an absolute value. What those are all the variables that are missing. So you're going, okay, I've got R squared of 0.82. So at 82% of the behavior of this data is explained by this line. And my sum of squared errors is X. But there's a bunch of stuff in there that isn't explained. In that particular case, that example of the R squared of being 0.82, it might be 18% of what's going on in here is not explained by the variables in this thing, and there's a bunch of errors in it. Now, those errors aren't statistically significant. I have a 95% or 90% or 85% or 75% confidence in the data that I've got that it's going to be able to predict X. So you've got these three components in here. In the Taylor rule, you've got what's the definition of potential? You're utilizing historical data, and you're utilizing regression analysis, which in and of itself implies that there's inherent error because you don't have every potential variable included. And that line is not going to be a perfect line, but it's a sum of squared errors, and you're trying to get the best fit. And so here's the lesson to come out of this. One, yes, we can take most of this economic data, we can mod it, we can put it into R, or we can put it in a Python, or we can put it in SPSS, crunch it and spit out formulas on this is what we should do with the economy, this is what we should do with the economy. If we do this, this is going to happen, and that's going to spit stuff out. As consumers, as smart business people, whether it's the Taylor rule, or whether it's your managers or finance people, or whether it's a study from the Cato Institute, look for stuff like this in definitions, because none of it is gospel. Every bit of it has error, and every bit of it has assumption. The most scientific and mathematic estimates are estimates. And so don't take all this stuff as gospel. So again, it's criticized because it doesn't work at the extremes, just like Newtonian physics doesn't work at the extremes either. And so at the end of the day, you've got this, be skeptics. Dig into these things, pull the definitions apart. So really, we went into the Taylor rule. Again, I'll go through it a little bit more on the math side, but I wanted you to look at the definition. The reason I put that definition up there the way I did was to show you guys that, hey, look, tear this stuff apart. Don't take it as gospel. Don't think that when someone walks up to you and go, hey, this is the answer. Look at the assumptions behind the answer, because you can probably find 3 or 4 ways that it's not. So there's the Taylor rule, the equation. So the nominal Fed funds rate equals The real Fed funds rate, usually 2%, plus the rate of inflation, plus 1/2 times the rate of inflation minus the target rate of inflation, plus 1/2 times the log of real output minus the log of potential output. Doesn't that make a lot of sense? You want to go calculate this for just a couple times? Just
I can't wait.
So exciting.
It actually seems, I don't know what's difficult, but it seems fairly basic. It's the difference, it's half the difference, half the difference.
Your math 161.
Yeah.
Remember that log? Yeah, I know, it's disgusting.
So this is the reality of the Taylor rule. The is what it said this Fed fund rate should be. And the black line is what the Fed funds target rate was. So let me ask you a question. Let's get out here to 2009. So this year is financial crisis, right? It's cranking along, all of a sudden everything goes to hell in a handbasket. Financial crisis said the Fed funds rate should be negative 2%. What they set it at? Zero. You get out here and it says it should be 2%. What's it set at? 0.25%. Why don't you think they've increased it? Why aren't they following the Taylor rule?
Trying to get the economy going.
Yeah, but this says that we're getting the economy going. This is optimized, man. Lag. Well, they've been lagging since 2011. That's a lot of lag. What do you think? Why? Why aren't they following their own rule? They're setting us up with an asset bubble. They're setting us up so that, just like, they're setting us up like here, when they should have had interest rates higher. Now that they had interest rates too low, and all of a sudden you had this big asset bubble, and the housing bubble blows up, and everything goes to hell in a handbasket. What's going on here?
Guys lying to the people.
They're lying.
They're picking up everything.
Because Trump is a person.
You're kind of honest with it. I'm not going down the line. Why do you think they've kept rates low? Why do you think they kept rates low here? Look at when this happened. 2001. Woo! Over here. 2008, 2009, 2010.
9/11 impacts the economy. 01, 2.
And the recession, right?
Uh-huh.
So they want to keep it stable after it rises, it tends to drop, it also goes up and down. Their rules saying it goes up, if it's stable, it won't go through another drop.
So there's two answers. There's the answer Dilling gave, which is generally the answer the Fed gives, which is we don't follow the Taylor rule. We use it as a piece of guidance. But what we try and do is maintain a stable interest rate environment so that, if we make a change in the interest rate, that the market kind of knows what it is. We're signaling it out in advance. And so Janet Yellen is going, hey, we're going to increase interest rates because we think we should. The Taylor rule says we should. So we're going to, potentially increase interest rates in June. So we're really only doing this because we want to maintain a relatively stable interest rate and predictable stable interest rate environment, which will help provide stability for the economy. That's generally what they're going to say. The cynical answer is because they want to juice the economy. So they're going, okay, we got 9/11. People are feeling like this is kind of crappy, right? This is not a good moment in the United States history. So we're going to make them feel good. We're going to keep the interest rates artificially low. We're going to make sure that the economy's kind of really, really juicing. Now, what happens when the economy's really juicing is you end up with inflation asset bubbles. You had a bubble back here with real estate and it blows up. Boom. The economy always comes back and corrects itself. It's an ecosystem. And so now, what are you starting to see? We talked about at the beginning of class. What's happening to real estate prices now? Just here or everywhere?
Here is very different.
Everywhere.
So nationwide, we've seen increasing real estate prices, with some areas, particularly along the coast, seeing dramatic increases. One of the arguments to be made is that interest rates are too low, making money too cheap and easy, and people are buying assets that have inflationary value with the expectation that as interest rates rise, they're not going to be able to afford the mortgages. And so they need to buy now, which creates upward price pressure. And so as a result, the argument could hold that what you're seeing here is another asset price bubble, which might be getting ready to pop anytime you see the Taylor rule saying that interest rates should be higher than the current Fed target rates. So let's talk about challenges to use it. It looks at historical data, but the economy is operating real time and prospectively. Congratulations. Answer 1. Finding proper coefficients is difficult. Real inflation rate, real capacity for output gap, because they are estimated. Bad data leads to bad results. Anyone knows what GIGO stands for? Yes, sir. Garbage in, garbage out. Policy pressure may make overreaction or underreaction desirable. So it says, well, you need to start increasing the interest rates, and they go, oh, no, we're not going to do that. We don't want to fork off the American people, so we're going to leave interest rates low. Or they go, you should drop interest rates dramatically. They go, oh, we're not going to do that. It's going to really disrupt the banking system. So we're just going to kind of try and keep things a little bit more stable because policy says that's a good idea. So why don't we take a break? Because this gets us to the Federal Open Market Committee. And I will let's call it quarter of.
Have you been working out? Yeah, I'm working.
I'm stuck at 320.
Oh, don't say that.
Well, I've been fighting it since 365.
You can get a lot of progress.
That's why I've been wearing one of them.
You
I
went
feel
from
sweat a lot, so I'm wearing one of them.
365 to down to 320.
Like, yeah,
Oh, that's pretty neat.
It's making a lot of progress.
What do you do this for? It's not very hard. Are you eating the same?
Actually, a few, yeah. But it's hard. Well, I'm motivated to really get for it, and I did. And then when I kind of like felt everything's going well, you know, so
Then you
I started
shut
shooting
down.
here and there, and started slowing down here and there. But
I
then
don't come back.
now you gotta go back to that standard of motivation, and it's just
It's hard to get back.
so do what I can.
It took me, I haven't worked in a long time. I have 40 confidence. I do. I used to be. See, just look at it. I have 40 pounds to lose to get to my post of pre-pregnancy. All my clothes now are like lazy.
I would love clothes when I was 250 and now they're 50. So I've been trying to not find more clothes. Trying to get the ones I can use again. So that's one of my motivations to look at my wardrobe and go, I'm gonna wear it one day.
But you know, if I did it before after my pregnancy.
So there you go, Charlotte. There's my breakdown. I'm all British and Irish.
Oh wow!
Wow.
Okay.
So 95% of Western Europe.
Mall Viking.
So you have that all along?
What do you mean?
This data, you put together?
Oh no, I went and got this. This all.
Oh, wow.
This is all assembled.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, can you go up there? Yeah.
Scientific details.
Mhm.
Yeah,
So how
it's
do they keep a record of all that?
Hey, tell me what to do.
I guess anyway, your last name has showed up.
no. They actually took my DNA.
Oh, really?
So I spit in the thing and sent it in, and
Mhm.
they said, okay, what are you? Kind of,
Wow.
what are you? Who are you?
So you're really a European descent.
Oh yeah, as if there was any doubt, really.
But I think a lot of people with occupation here in the U.S. are, right, the Europeans.
Yeah, predominantly.
Yeah. Wow.
See,
I wanna try that. I mean, you know, my family's at everything. That is so neat. Where did you go to get yours?
23andMe is where I did it.
Do you know where you did that? Oh, 23?
Yeah, when it's you can get it online at 23andme.com or Amazon. But yeah, I've got more than 84% I've got more Neanderthal than 84% of their customers. I'm in the,
Wow.
and then
Expensive?
$100. Yep.
That's like peanuts to you. Oh, that's a nut.
4%. So there you go.
Wow.
So you can look at my ancestors. There we go. There's my ancestors. So you can see the family resemblance. Especially this one right here. Isn't he a suave, debonair dude? Uh-huh.
That is so funny.
Pretty good.
I'll put on more Milton.
Say so.
In reference to talking about government's role in a free society, you mentioned some of the market failures, and I think that you may have just passed over one that is of utmost importance, and that is of poverty. And in prefacing my question, I'd like to refer to what President Kennedy said, that if a free society cannot help the many who are poor, it cannot save the few who are rich. And to say that, well, we are a government of the people, and when there is a large sector of the people who are hurting, perhaps it is the responsibility of this government of the people to help out. My question is regarding how free are the poor, how free are the unemployed, and how free are those people who are disadvantaged? And so in reference to that, what is government's role?
Sure. First of all, I'm glad to see one vote for the poor. First of all, the government doesn't have any responsibility. People have responsibility. This building doesn't have responsibility. You and I have responsibility. People have responsibility. Second, the question is, how can we as people exercise our responsibility toward our fellow man most effectively? That's the problem. So far as poverty is concerned, there has never in history been a more effective machine for eliminating poverty than the free enterprise system and the free market. The period in which you had the greatest improvement in the lot of the ordinary man was a period of the 19th and early 20th century. Those of us in this room are the heirs of that. We benefited from the way in which our parents and our grandparents were able to come here. And by virtue of the freedom that was offered to them, were able to make a better life for themselves and them and us. But next, if you look at the real problems of poverty and denial of freedom to people in this country, almost every single one of them is a result of government action and would be eliminated if you eliminated the bad government failures. Let me be precise and specific. Why do we have so high an unemployment rate among black teenagers? It's a disgrace and a scandal. Why do we have so high an unemployment rate? First of all, because we give them lousy schooling through governmental schools, which make them unqualified to hold decent jobs. And second of all, we require employers to discriminate against them by not hiring them unless their productivity is enough to justify a minimum wage. The minimum wage rate is the most anti-Negro law in the books. And it's an anti-Negro law because it precisely, having first not enabled the young blacks to have a decent schooling so that they can have productivity, we next deny them the on-the-job training that they might get if you could induce employers by being able to hire them for relatively low wages to give them on-the-job training that would make them qualify for higher payment and higher productivity. In the third place, we have constructed a governmental welfare scheme which has been a machine for producing poor people. We have induced people to come under control of welfare. I'm not blaming the people, don't misunderstand me. It's our fault for constructing so perverse and so ill-shaped a monster as the whole set of welfare programs we have under which we encourage people, families to break up. We encourage people to move from one part of the country and come to another, under which we have, in effect, made many people poor. And yet, when all this is said and done, have I ever been where? I have certainly, of course, more so than most of the people in this room. How many of you have worked a 12-hour day and gotten paid 78 cents? But let me go back to but you know that's all irrelevant. Is there one of you who is going to say that you don't want a doctor to treat you for cancer unless he himself has had cancer? I could go down the line. Well, when all is said and done, well, there are people in this country who are worse off than other people. By and large, even the poorest people in this country are relatively well off compared to the conditions in many other countries in the world. What we take as our standard of poverty, is above the average income of all of the people in the Soviet Union, let alone of the people in India or China or in other countries. Now, that doesn't mean we should be satisfied with it. We are a wealthier country and we've been more productive. And we should set higher standards by ourselves. But by the same token, we ought to have a sense of proportion. And we ought to recognize both the source and the problem.
Milton Friedman is probably one of my all-time favorite.
What year was that?
I think that was 75, 76. But he is one of my all-time favorite economists. I'm a big Uncle Milton fan.
Not Milton Berle, but Milton Friedman. Just because I think and I've read a lot of his stuff, but when you kind of dig down below it, I think he makes a lot of sense. And he looks at the biggest thing that Milton Friedman does that I think is somewhat challenging for all of us is he truly believes the free market's free. And so he's like, look, if you actually allow for a free market, a fully free market, it'll function. The issue is we don't really have a free market. We have a mercantilist market where the government, we have a socialist government or a mercantilist market government. We haven't had a free economy. The government has either benefited large business, which is mercantilist, or it's benefited essentially the government itself, which is socialist. And it tends to be, but in both cases, it's intervened in the free economy to attempt to benefit the economy and not to be so cynical as to say that they're trying to ruin anything. And they where the hell is maybe with good intentions on both sides of the political aisle. But it's tended to be, you get marketplace on one side, you get socialism on the other, neither one works well. And both have, again, government intervention has unintended consequences. I think Friedman would argue that, if you just let the whole economy be free, a lot of these issues would resolve themselves in a couple generations. And the challenge is, you can't let the economy just be free, or it's not just free. So that's nice in theory, but in fact, how do you begin to move it toward a more efficient free economy? So you'll begin to see more Milton Friedman for the next 4 classes during grades and such, just because
I like it.
what I've learned during the labor unrest down at St. Martin's University is a lot of the instructors do a lot of this type of indoctrination in their classes, and they take the entire class like we're going to study in economic relations, so fight for 15. We're gonna, and they don't actually look at the economics of it. It becomes more like the, I don't know what the hell is, the social justice side of like the moving plan. You're in an economics class here, so class because I don't actually think it serves you well for me to stand up there and indoctrinate you. And it also doesn't serve you well for me to do it unless I did tell you this is, I try and warn you that I've got bias on this stuff, and here's my bias. But during breaks, I'll introduce you to Milton Friedman, Ludwig von Mises, Murray Rothbard. Some of these economists tend to be from more free market students because they get tends to work. So now.
So you believe in free market?
I tend to be a free market guy. I actually think it will work, but it's going to be scary. You're going to see a lot more ups and downs. It's going to be scary. We have to rely on each other. His comment that it's not the government's responsibility; it's the people's responsibility. The government is it's like the building's responsibility or it's the grass's responsibility. They're really not able to take responsibility for people within them. And I think anytime you do that, until the people step forward,
it's scary.
And when you build a lot of safety nets, folks go, well, I don't need to be a safety net, I need to step back. And so you've got challenges there as well.
So Federal Open Market Committee meets every 6 weeks and analyzes the information available and sets rate targets. So that's really what the FMOC does. And as I said, it met last week and released its hints going forward.
So there's 3 economic tools used by the Federal Open Market Committee. They're prepared by the staff economists and analysts at the Fed, and they blast out a bunch of information, and that bunch of information is what the Fed governors who are on the Federal Open Market Committee use to make determinations as to what to do with interest rates. Monetary policy. They're the teal book, the red book, and the beige book. So the teal book, it's confidential, top secret teal book. It's a report to the Federal Open Market Committee on Economic Conditions and Monetary Policy prepared by the Fed. You can't see it. If you ever get your hands on the teal book, it's like getting your hands on the nuclear codes. And they call it the teal book because it's a white book with 2 teal stripes on it. There used to be a blue book and a green book. And then they combined them now in the teal book. Isn't that clever of the government? Then you got the red book, which is top secret. The white book with 2 red stripes on it. It's a summary and commentary on current economic conditions by Federal Reserve District. It contains company names. It contains real detailed data, banks, specific, IBM is doing this, and this bank is doing that, and here's their canvas this, and this is bad news. And so they get down deep and dirty, and they do that so that the Fed governors have as much information as they need with recommendations from the analysts to be able to get it to the FMOC and go, okay, we need to drive economic policy one direction or the other, and here's what that policy should be.
The last one is the beige book.
That's public. It's a white book with 2 beige lines. And it's the red book, and it's redacted. They call it beige because it's boring. Anybody know what redacted is? Go ahead. So if you redact something, so if I said, okay, I'm going to put everybody's grades out, but I'm going to cover off your names so you can't see the names. The names have been redacted. So in the beige book, it's basically the content of the red book with the company names redacted and other very sensitive economic information redacted. So we're going to look at the beige book, because you should not leave an economics class without looking at the beige book. We won't look at goats or Milton Friedman. So as you guys are moving forward in your careers and you're going, you know, I don't know what the heck's going on in the economy, you can look at yourself, you can pull up the beige book. All you got to do is search it. It's up in the federalreserve.gov. And you can see what the Federal Reserve is saying about what's happening in the economy. Now, when the folks at CNN or USA Today or whatever, Huffington Post or BuzzFeed or whatever you guys look at for whatever meme you might be looking at in Facebook or Instagram, get their economic information, generally they just condense this. This is pretty good stuff. You've got, here's the overall economic activity. Reports from the 12 Federal Reserve Districts indicate the economy continued to expand at a modest pace across most regions from late November through the end of the year. They talk about things like non-auto retail sales have expanded, but several noted that sales over the holiday season were disappointing. And so you can read this, and it's not that long. I mean, it might look long, but for what it contains, it's not that long. It talks about employment as wages. Labor markets are reported to be tight or tightening during the period. Employment tight or tightening? Yeah. That means that there's more jobs than people to fill them. So when the labor market is tight, that means that you have low unemployment and low supply of workers relative to demand. Great question. Employment growth ranged from slight to moderate, and most districts indicated that wages increased modestly. So even in districts with layoffs, there's another reasons most reporting firms are said to have added employment on net. So it'll talk about employment. Then it moves down and it talks about prices, which is going to be inflation. So pricing pressure has intensified somewhat since the last report. So what do you think that means? Prices are going up, and we're starting to see some signs of inflation. 8 out of 12 Fed districts saw modest price increases. The remainder experienced slight increases or flat prices in the case of Atlanta. Increases in input costs were more widespread than increases in final goods prices. What does that mean? Think about what that means if you're a company. What does that mean to you?
Manufacturing prices, the input prices, manufacturing prices, raw prices going up.
Well, what about final good prices? What are happening to them? So what do you think is happening to profitability of the firms? It's going down. So here's what's happening, and this is all the stuff you can pick out of these Federal Reserve. I mean, this, like I said, I know I geek out on this stuff. You guys find it funny, but it's really kind of cool stuff, right? So you're looking at this, you're going, okay, here's what's happening. Corporate profits are beginning to fall because input costs, which are what? Materials and
production costs.
Which include
Labor.
Yeah. Predominantly labor. So you go back up here and you go, okay, labor costs are tightening. Employment, labor markets are tightening. Problems recruiting for less skilled jobs. Widespread difficulties in finding workers for skilled positions. Labor markets will continue to tighten in 2017 with wage pressures likely to rise and a pace of hiring to hold steady or increase. So all of a sudden what you're seeing now is the Fed saying, look, as you go out through the rest of the year, we think unemployment is going to continue to fall or at least stay steady, that there's going to be a lot of jobs out there, that it's going to be tough for us to find qualified people to fill those jobs, and as a result, we're going to see increasing wage pressure. That increasing wage pressure then follows through in pricing, and we're going, okay, we're seeing increased pricing in input costs, so that's going to be your cost of production, which is going to be wages plus raw materials, increasing faster than the prices in final goods. So what that means is corporate profits are beginning to shrink, or at least their margins, their gross margin is beginning to shrink. So you can start picking up cues in the economy if you're an investor and go, okay, should you be investing in manufacturing right now? Depends on how much of that manufacturing is driven by labor productivity, because if labor is becoming tighter and tighter and tighter, you might have trouble finding, or the company you're investing in might have trouble finding good workers. If you're unemployed, this might be a good time to get in the job market because the labor market is tight. People are going to have to take more risks on hiring employees because, hey, I can't find the unicorn I'm looking for, so I'm going to have to take one with a laid back hoof, or one with a blunted horn, or one that doesn't poop rainbows. I'm going to have to make some sort of adjustment in who I'm going to hire because you're seeing labor markets are tight. You're seeing prices are going up, but finished good prices aren't going up as rapidly, which means house savings aren't going up and wages are going up faster than that. That means that they're feeling more and more wealthy. And you've got decreasing margins at the corporate level because input prices are going up faster than their ability to raise prices in the market. And so home prices were stable or up modestly. Businesses in several districts reportedly expect further modest increases in input costs and selling prices in 2017. So you got prices. Then you got highlights by Federal Reserve District. So you can look at it by district. You go, okay, New York, Boston, Philadelphia. We go down to our district here, which is in San Francisco. So economic activity in the 12th district continues to expand at a moderate pace. Holiday retail sales picked up and activity in the service sector remains strong. What's the service sector?
That's the when jobs that don't have anything to do with material production.
Right. So that's going to be your cleaning positions. That's going to be law firms, accountants. Anything that's not in hardcore production or agriculture. Agricultural sector were mixed. Activity in manufacturing sector was stable. Contacts reported strong activity in the housing market and moderate growth in overall lending activity. This is from January. That seems consistent with what you think the world's experiencing out here? Yep, you may see it more aggressive here. So then you can roll down even further. You see the summary is repeated from the top, but then you get to dig in all the way down into the same breakout as the national. So on balance, wage pressure strengthened, labor shortages in the technology, healthcare, and financial industries boosted wages for skilled workers. Minimum wage legislation increased compensation for unskilled workers across the district. And again, that's the West Coast, so California, Oregon, Washington predominantly. When contact the media and entertainment industry reported some companies were postponing filling vacant positions in order to offset rising costs from minimum wage increases. St. Martin's did that, by the way. Overall price inflation increased modestly over the reporting period. Contacts in the hospitality and restaurant industries reported increasing the price of goods and services to offset rising labor costs. What happened in January in Washington State? Minimum wage went from $9.47 an hour to $11 an hour. As a result, companies are increasing the price of goods and services to offset rising labor costs because that creates wage compression at the bottom, so everybody starts seeing increases. Price increases for branded drugs, some generic drugs, moderated from a strong pace, and then you kind of could walk through commodities. You got retail, trade, and services. You've got manufacturing, agriculture, real estate. Real estate market continued to grow at a strong pace. Prices for commercial real estate increased and vacancy rates remained at historical low levels. So here's kind of the point. The Beige Book, which is publicly available information, is published every 6 weeks. So this gets updated. Basically, there's a little bit of a delay between the Fed meeting and the Beige Book getting published. You've got the ability you have the ability to go take a look and in about 10 minutes get the Fed's view of what's happening in the regional economy or any other regional economy. You want to keep going, oh, you know, I'm thinking about taking that job in Atlanta. What's going on in Atlanta? I can go take a look. What's going on in the Midwest? I can go take a look. What do I think, or what does the Fed think is generally happening nationwide? You can take a look. This is easy to see, and it's not written in like mumbo jumbo crap. You can read it, you can understand it. These resources are out there for you guys. You don't need to guess. We like to guess. A lot of us, you know, I've been making arguments with some of my colleagues that facts don't matter. Because sometimes people believe what they want to believe, and if the facts don't fit the narrative, they don't change the narrative, they change the facts. And in this particular case, a lot of us were like, well, we think the economy's doing this. And I have a feeling, I walk down the street, and, you know, I see all the homeless people, and so unemployment must be at record highs. And I've got, you know, a friend of mine, and they can't sell their house down in Monsanto, so obviously the real estate market's in really crappy shape. And you don't need to guess. Fed's out there collecting all this data, and they summarize it for you every 6 weeks. Serve it right up to you on a platter. Regional data, national data, in real plain English. As a matter of fact, you can get really drilled down. Contact Pacific Northwest reported that while housing demand remained high, construction activity was constrained by shortages in available land, labor, and materials. So what do you think that means for existing home sales? Existing home sales will start going up because you can't build more tract housing out in Puyallup because there's shortages not only in available land, which is driven to some extent by a Growth Management Act, but also labor and materials. So all of a sudden they're like, crap, we can't get people to build this stuff. We can't get the materials in to build this stuff. It's too expensive. We don't have enough land on which to construct it because we have limitations around things like water rights, or Growth Management Act requires certain densities in areas and minimum densities in others, maximum densities in others. And so you've got this available, federalreserve.gov. It's really some pretty cool stuff. I like it, but of course I geek out on this stuff. So you've got that available at your fingertips. It's published every 6 weeks, without fail. You can look at the Beige Book. So let's talk a little bit. Any questions on that cool Federal Reserve.gov Beige Book?
Does it usually stay like 5 months behind?
No. I just pulled one off the top. A link. I can.
No, it's fine. I looked around.
Yeah. Normally it's a month or so behind, not 6 months behind. I just pulled the first one for the year and a half. So structure challenges, time consistency. So time consistency, we're going to start talking about what happens when the central bank gets pressure. We've got a structure in our economy where the central bank is designed to maintain stability in the system. We talked about that at the beginning of class. You know, the central bank's entire purpose is to keep us confident in the economy, confident in the monetary system, and maintain stability in that system. So it's structured in such a way that you've got this independent Federal Reserve, which doesn't really answer to Congress or the president. The president makes appointments, the Senate confirms them, and after that, they're off on their own, doing their own thing. They're not really answerable to anybody. They're not audited by anybody. They are theoretically completely independent. And we talked about some of the pros and cons of that independence last class. Some of the structural challenges around that are things like time consistency. So the central bank, the Fed, claims to work to maintain low inflation. We're going to maintain low inflation. We're going to maintain inflation at 1 to 2% or 2 to 4%, 2%. But is pressured into expansionist policy to raise inflation later. What does that mean?
The economy's going too fast, and the Fed ends up having to raise the inflation rate for the risk-free rate to slow the economy back down.
What's expansionist policy? Yeah, you want the economy to grow. And grow fast. Now, why would they get pressure to do that?
Before election.
Before elections. Let's put pressure on.
I mean, yeah.
What kind of pressure do you think they put on? I mean, you know, they can't fire the Fed. What kind of pressure can they put on?
Well, if there's no growth in the economy, that wouldn't be, jump started, increase.
Yeah, but what if the Fed goes, hey, look, we're following the Taylor rule, we got this thing dialed right in, we're good. We don't want an expansionary policy. Right now, what we need is a neutral policy. What's the driver here? How can they put pressure on?
What's the policy?
What's the policy?
What do politicians use to, change tax laws?
Fiscal policy?
Fiscal, yeah. Is it fiscal policy?
It's even more based than that. I don't know if it's in the book or not. As you guys probably can go off menu in this class. And do. They go, hey, look, man, your term's coming up in 2 years. I get reelected and I get you reappointed. You want to keep your job as a Fed governor, we need to make sure that I'm elected. You don't know who's good, I appointed you. You don't know what the next guy's going to do or gal. And so, you want a good chance to get reappointed. You probably want to make sure that we have a pretty good economy going into this next election cycle, don't you? So there's ways for them to pressure. You can have public pressure. This is what a couple of you were talking about. Like, okay, well, let's all work together. And if we're not, I'm going to make sure that everybody knows you're not working together. And this is your fault, not my fault. The flipping Fed did it. It's not my deal. But generally, it's go along to get along, and maybe I'll scratch your back if you scratch mine. The public refuses to believe the central bank, and it acts as if high inflation is the norm, blunting expansionary efforts and increasing and creating an inflation trap. So what happens is if the public goes, okay, the central bank goes, we're going to increase interest rates now, or we're going to put an expansion in now, we're going to deal with inflation later. We're gonna kind of tell you one thing and do the other. We're gonna throw the expansion in. We're gonna drive inflation up, but we're really not gonna tell you that's what we're doing. We're gonna tell you we're maintaining low inflation, but we're gonna be pressured by the politicians to try and drive the economy up and hope that this sleight of hand doesn't. That you don't realize what happens until after the election's over. If the public figures this out. If the economists got to see what's going on, they go, hey, wait a second, this is a bunch of crap. They're putting in expansionist policies, they're lowering interest rates. We're already seeing inflation rates pushing up into the 3-4% range, and they're lowering interest rates. They're trying to drive additional growth into the economy. I don't believe that this isn't going to impact inflation. I don't believe that they're actually going to deal with inflation this is a problem. What ends up happening then is folks begin to act as if there's high inflation. When there's high inflation, you don't tend to see a lot of savings, or when there's an expectation of increased inflation, you don't see savings because the savings begin to devalue. Static, remember the static investments tend not to give you a high return. So you, okay, we're going to not participate. We're going to assume that we have high inflation. We're going to be in an act like there's high inflation. So we're going to start moving our assets into inflationary protected assets, so real estate, gold, other assets which tend not to be all that useful for production purposes, but tend to have significantly increasing values in an inflationary economy. Well, when they do that, what happens to the demand for those assets? And what happens when demand goes up? And then what happens if prices go up? Demand may go down. Where you have this inflation trap that you're talking about is when demand goes up, and then demand continues to rise because it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Oh my God, we're seeing inflation. So I've got to put my assets into inflation-protected asset classes like gold. So all of a sudden you start seeing gold going up and up and up. And instead of going, okay, the law of supply and demand should say, well, if prices are going up, demand should fall, or supply should rise so that it beats demand and brings prices back to equilibrium. When they talk about an inflation trap, it's that self-fulfilling prophecy, and folks go, oh my God, that's the asset class of protection against inflation. See, we're seeing inflation, so demand rises. And then the price goes up again, and people go, oh my God, demand, this is where I need to have my money because that's where that's where it's going to protect it from inflation, and demand rises. And demand rises faster than supply can react and faster than the rational market reacts, and pretty soon you've got an inflation trap. Where essentially it's a self-fulfilling prophecy for inflation. So how do you combat that? Think back historically, especially those of you who are studying things like the 1972 financial crisis or the 1929 to 1939 financial crisis. How do you combat that? How did we combat that? Say again?
No, he's going to say something.
Oh, he did say something.
No.
I thought you were going to do the question.
I'm putting it on.
Put a timeout on the business.
Yeah, what happened was all of a sudden you saw in some of these areas in 72, 73, Nixon took us off the gold standard. He's like, okay, we got a problem. Boom, I'm gonna bust the gold standard. I'm gonna essentially take the pin to the currency off the gold standard and hopefully try and bring kind of deal with some of these inflationary issues and deal with some of these debt issues that the US was starting to undergo. In the 30s, you saw the president do the same thing. He said, okay, we're pulling folks off of commodity standards. We're going to freeze transactions. We're going to try and slow this thing down. We're going to put price controls in place, whether they're floors or ceilings, in order to be able to, and Nixon use price controls as well, to try and break that cycle of inflation trap. So there's a couple other ways you can do it too. One is the ideology of appointees. What do I mean by that?
Put people in places, key places that share a particular point of view.
And what kind of point of view for time consistency or for this say one thing, do another about inflation?
Going to help you to benefit or to get to your cause to get where you need to be.
Yeah, so if you want to avoid this problem, this challenge, and you want to appoint ideologues, what kind of ideologue do you want to appoint?
Inflation?
Yeah, you want to appoint somebody who goes, inflation's bad. You want to appoint Milton Friedman. You want to appoint anybody who's basically like, I don't care come hell or high water, inflation's bad. And they've got a track record of going inflation's bad. And they're not a pragmatist, or like inflation's bad. Well, when's it bad? It's always bad. How much? Too much. Doesn't matter. Any inflation's bad. So you look at the appointee and you go, look, I'm gonna, instead of appointing someone who might be like your instructor, who tends to be a dyed-in-the-wool pragmatist, you appoint someone who's a dyed-in-the-wool idealist, who is not going to be influenced by that pressure. If you go, you're not going to be reappointed. Okay, I don't care. I'll go back to Stanford and become an economics professor. I don't really care. I hate inflation. We're not going to have inflation. So you appoint folks who have an ideology that's basically going to be one. They're kind of like the untouchables back in the prohibition days. Okay, you can't bribe me. You can't screw me because it's all about the law. And the law in this case is inflation is bad. So you might put pressure on me, and I'm going to give you 2 thumbs up, and still, or 2 something else up, and I'm still going to go with anti-inflation policy because that's what's best for the economy. You got public pressure. So you got the opposite of what we had just talked about, where you're going, okay, well, I'm putting pressure on them. They're not putting inflation, or they're not putting enough of an expansionist policy into the economy. You've got the ability for the Fed and other folks to go, hey, look, and this is what they do when you see things like Janet Yellen. We talked about it earlier, kind of, I think it was Trump's comment, kind of signaling this is what's going to happen. What that does is it puts a flag in the ground. Okay, we've analyzed, we've said here's what's going to happen. We published the beige book so you can see what our analysis is. We're generally telling you in advance of what we're thinking about, because that puts essentially kind of creates a level of transparency on how we're thinking, which makes it harder for you to go, well, it's their fault. Or they're not doing this for any logical sense. We're kind of creating this culture of science or precision, which isn't necessarily the case as we saw with the Taylor rule. We're creating this view that it's a precise approach and that we're going to use this as a precise approach. So we can use public pressure going both directions. They might use public pressure to go, hey, they're not pushing the economy hard enough. We could use public pressure, we meaning the Fed, we use public pressure to go, hey, look, we're providing a stable base. We're trying to combat inflation and manage growth at the same time. So we're trying to take a middle ground. We're utilizing these scientific methods and this analysis in order to be able to make that decision. So you shouldn't, essentially put pressure back on the politicians who are calling for higher inflation. You've got the independence, the structural independence of the Fed. So you appoint me, Eddie appoints me, and he goes, you're my Fed governor for San Francisco, and I go, thank you, President Eddie, this is a wonderful thing. And then I go do my thing, and 6 months later, Eddie goes, look, I got elections coming up in 2018. I need my Republican brethren to get more seats in the Senate. So I need you to kind of juice the economy for a while. I go, sorry, I'm seeing increasing wage pressure. I'm seeing increasing supply of land, and I'm seeing decreasing supply of building supplies. I've got high manufacturing activity in my district, and candidly, what I need to do right now is raise interest rates and slow some of this stuff down. And you go, no, you can't do that, man. I need really full employment. I want everybody employed, and then I want children employed, and I want child labor, and I want people using their dogs. I don't really care what they're doing. I want full economy. That independence, I can't do nothing. I go, no, sorry, it ain't gonna happen. He can rail, he can scream, he can go throw fits. But unless the Congress is gonna impeach me, I'm fine. I've got that independence, and we've got it structured that way. And you got rules or guidelines for policy implementation. So things like the Taylor rule, where you go, hey, look, I'd love to help you. I really would. You're going to find president, and you're my political party, and I think you're a wonderful human being. But I got the Taylor rule, and this is kind of an objective measure, and I can't do much about it. I'm sorry. Now this is how. Shouldn't have this recording, but I will anyway. This is generally how I manage finances at a place like St. Martin's. I go, the bank has rules. Here's a set of guardrails. We have a set of rules that are set by our crediting agency. Here's a set of guardrails. And here's another set of rules that we set by the board of trustees. It says to be healthy at college looks like this. I go, and here's box 1, box 2, box 3. And when someone goes, but we just need to do this, and it'll make life all that much better. My response is, I'd love to help you, but we're going to blow bank covenants, or we're not going to meet accreditation standards, or the board has given us guidance that we can't do X. So who's the bad person in those cases?
The rules.
The rules.
Yeah.
And do I feel bad? No. I mean, I do actually. I'm like, I'm sorry. I'd love to help you, but the rules say I can't do it. So those rules and guidelines, if they're objective and they're reasonably rational, and folks who look at it from the outside can go, yeah, that's irrational. I get it. That sucks, but I get it. It takes that pressure away. It takes that peer pressure, or that even that, oh my God, you know, I really would love to give you another, I'd love to stand up that women's crew team, but we can't do it because it's going to blow bank covenants. It costs us $500,000 to stand up a women's crew team over the next 2 years, and I just can't do it. I'm sorry. I am sorry. And I feel bad about it, but I can't get pressured into it, because the rules are there. And so the same thing happens with time consistency or with the Fed. They use things like the Taylor rule to go, guys, I'm sorry, I can't break the rules. Here it is. This isn't guidelines. These are the rules. We got a 2% inflation target. I'm sorry. And so they use those to help kind of alleviate some of the pressure here. So the Fed's independent from Congress and the president. Elected officials can't control the policies. Is that good? Why or why not?
Yes, it is good.
We did talk about it last time.
We did.
Because it helps balance out things.
What do you mean balance out things? What things?
There's no bias.
Well, if the president wants you to, like for example, you just said, if the president wants you to do something because it will help his campaign, or you know, you could, as the Fed, you could say, no.
Yeah, but the president's elected by the people, right?
Yeah, that's the
He's
people.
elected by, yeah, but what about the people? Shouldn't listen to the representatives of the people? I mean, what about Congress? They're representatives of the people. They're elected every 2 years. Why should the Fed not have to listen to them? Why should they be this unelected bunch of bureaucrats that just sit in their little Fed governor places and hang out and eat caviar and set target interest rates? Why are they not accountable? Shouldn't they be accountable, Eddie? Come on, shouldn't they be accountable to somebody? To whom?
The news outlets.
Yeah. But that doesn't even help either.
You guys get a taste of law school now. Whatever answer you give me is going to be
I'm
wrong.
not going to.
You're not going to law school?
No.
Oh, you should. It's great.
I don't mind.
Whatever answer you give me is going to be wrong.
I'm not a good articulate. Right?
So is it good? Do you think it's a good idea?
I think
They're completely unanswerable to the president. They're unanswerable to the people. They're a bunch of little demagogues that sit in their little, that hang out every 6 weeks and decide the economy. You guys all think this is a good idea? No oversight.
I think it's a good idea. It separates the monitoring that we talk about. I mean, we know that already.
I'm glad that all my breath wasn't wasted. Our folks listen.
So there's no like biases.
They do have oversight to an extent, though, man.
Explain.
I remember what we were talking about, you know, if they're not doing a good job, it could be, did you say the head of the Fed can be impeached, or is that a whole different?
Yeah.
So I mean, they have some oversight, they have a lot of autonomy, but they do have some oversight.
Yeah, what you've got, and again, I tend to agree, the system has worked fairly well. And while there's always issues and there's, you know, audit the Fed and oh my gosh, it's fiat currency and this is all screwed up and what have you. When you take a look objectively, And I kind of go back to what my little Milton Friedman said, there's the systems that we've had here, the economy that's worked here has generally been pretty good. Even when it's bad, it's not that bad. And so when you look at the independence, essentially the Fed being able to take a step back and go, look, we're not having to answer to the next election. We're not having to answer to a constituent who's calling and screaming at us. We can be pretty objective in taking a step back, looking at the data, looking at the approach, and actually kind of making the tweaks that are necessary in order to be able to function. It really comes back to, for those of us who are military folks, your plans group does not tend to sit right on the front lines, right? Your plans group, your 3 sits back in the back, and as you move back, they move further back. So your theater 3 is generally not sitting right there on the front lines watching tanks go by. It gives them a step back, some perspective, where bullets aren't flying, where they can take a look at the full battlefield and go, okay, where do we really need to be focused? How do we need to have control and kind of develop the battlefield to our advantage? The Fed's got the same mindset. Without having to answer to folks who are calling them up every day, but being able to take a couple steps decisions that are not going to be driven by the next election, or not going to be driven by public opinion, as much as it is driven by what they feel like are the best economic policies for the country. And if the federal government has significant issues with it, the Congress and the president can use fiscal policy to offset and or overwhelm candidly monetary policy, or they can move to impeachment if you've got high crime and misdemeanors. But at the end of the day, the system has tended to work well where the folks have sat kind of in their ivory tower, overlooked everything and said, okay, based upon what I'm seeing here, I'm going to tweak these things in order to make the economy better. I'm going to pull levers hard to make the economy better. I'm not going to react to emotion. I'm going to react more to data and objective measures. So we talked through this a little bit. There's an argument that it's undemocratic, the current system, and that we're a democracy. We're not, we're a republic. But the word democracy, and it's an undemocratic process. The people can't control the Fed. And I added, quickly at any rate, they can over time, because you can elect presidents and who will appoint folks who tend to follow a certain policy, which will then, as long as the Senate is reasonably well aligned, will then confirm them. So what's the pros and the cons to the people not being able to kind of influence the Fed? Why don't we have direct election of the Fed? Why don't we have it as the fourth branch of government? Many people cynically will argue it is the fourth branch of government.
Well, the people don't, I don't think, let me use an example. I don't know how many people I've heard say, "All right, President Trump, he's going to build a wall. It's going to be awesome." I don't want those people dictating monetary policy. I don't think people, the average American, to include myself, know enough about it to make an informed decision on who should be running it.
But you're like judges.
Doesn't mean the judges are always the best people for the job.
But the judges also have there's law and precedent and all that stuff that they kind of have to follow. The Fed doesn't seem to have that set of rules. They're kind of like their own little world. And in my mind, I don't think people can justifiably elect somebody. It's a complicated system and they just don't know it. And they don't have any, like when a Fed goes in, they don't have like things that they have to follow. That's my answer.
For the really qualified people to run that, that part of the government, because, for example, anybody can just rally the people and he becomes the president. Even if
You don't think we need a qualified president?
No, we don't need a qualified president, but because the people can vote for any Tom, Dick, and Harry, you know what I mean? Like, it's just gonna be, anybody can be president. I could be president tomorrow if I have the charisma, right? But for the feds, we need professionals who know about economics, who know about the, you know, how to run money and everything, you know, to run that. So you can't just have anybody get in there because they were voted. Someone has to appoint them, almost like getting a job.
But state court judges, you could have pretty much, I mean, Charlotte, for state court judge, do it.
Oh my God.
Okay, we-
Well, judges are different because they don't really affect the economy as much as, okay, maybe I don't know. Let me not talk too much.
Oh, no, keep talking.
Okay, my level of education on judges is that they run like the Supreme Court and, you know, the municipal court and all that, right? So I don't really know everything the judge that comes to in front of the judge for him to decide on, but I don't think it's as critical as, you know, the feds when it comes to the economy and keeping up the economy.
What do I think? I'm kind of biased. So what do I think is your federal judges are all appointed for largely the same reason that you guys are articulating, which is, you know, they want to try and find those qualified folks who are going to pass Senate muster, and they get those folks into the appellate, district court, and Supreme Court positions. And those folks have tremendous impact on the economy. The only reason we had an Affordable Care Act or had one, still have one, I guess, is because Chief Justice Roberts said that's not a tax. That's a tax, it's not a fine. And so therefore, you can have an individual mandate. The reason you have things like the minimum wage nationally is because the Supreme Court said that impacts interstate commerce, and therefore the federal government can regulate it. Matter of fact, many of your economically driven civil rights arguments are interstate commerce arguments. So the courts have had tremendous impacts on the economy. Having said that, I think election of state court judges is stupid. Now, that doesn't mean it won't run for state court judge at some point, but I think it's good because that'll show you just how silly it is to elect someone who's a judge. But you can. And the reason we do that out here is Washington has, I think, the most statewide elected positions in the United States. And we've got more coming because they just stood on a whole other set of appellate courts for tax courts. It goes to when Washington was created, became a state. There was a real drive to create direct democracy. So that's why we had a lot of initiatives, and that's why you have so many statewide offices. So auditors, superintendent of public instruction, and attorney general, and all that stuff. Here, other states, most of those are appointed positions. Supreme Court appointed positions. District Court appointed positions. You may have retention elections, so that it's appointed by the governor, and then people can decide to retain them or not, but generally they're not elected. So for many of the same reasons that you guys articulated, the Fed has been and remains appointed and appointed kind of technocrats that are really good at economics and not really good at politics. And it's stayed that way for a reason. And that reason is for the independents, and because it's an incredibly complex, incredibly powerful position. They have 6 of them. There's 12 total. 6 represent the the Fed Open Market Committee, and they're geniuses. They're economic geniuses that really try and come up with a really good answer for us. They do tend to have areas of strength and expertise, just like judges do. So you've got conservative and aggressive, and you've got supply siders, and you've got demand siders, and you've got folks who tend to espouse Milton Friedman, and then you got folks that will espouse other economic Keynesian type economic policies. But at the end of the day, they're all kind of technocrats that work
in a very close arrangement with each other in order to be able to get good economic policy. So that's the reason why it's generally been approached that way from an independence perspective. So research, and I've researched the U.S. along with a number of other central banks, basically say, yeah, this works. It works better when you've got this central bank independence. Tends to work better, tends to give more stability, and tends to create lower inflation. So there's studies, not necessarily by the Cato Institute. Cato Institute doesn't like the Fed. But there's studies out there that basically show that the methodology that we use is probably the most stable of the current systems for central bank. And with that, we will stop for the evening. Oh no, I'm not going to go into monetary policy rules because that's just too exciting. And I've only got a couple of minutes, and if I keep going, you guys are just going to be fascinated for hours. So I really want to save some of this till Wednesday.
So what I will do, actually, I don't have anybody. I don't have Kim here, and I don't have Brianna here, and those are the two that do Lacey classes. So I'm going to wait on. Yeah, she does both. So I'm going to wait on the evaluations. Actually, they can get slipped under the door down below. So I'll hand them out now. What the heck? You guys have been through this drill.
I appreciate your.
I gave you perfect rating last time.
Say again?
I gave you all classes in last time.
Oh,
Perfect.
great. Well, if you could pass these out, and here's the envelope, and if one of you would be so kind as to just slip it under the St. Martin's door downstairs, I'll pay it down my way. All right, wonderful. Thanks, everyone.
It's as you guys could probably tell from the last time, I think you guys are our customer. So don't be afraid to be candid. You guys certainly were on the last set, and I appreciate that.